Welcome.
The Pathology Innovation Collaborative Community is a regulatory science initiative that aims to facilitate innovations in pathology, as well as advance safety and effectiveness evaluation. The PI Collaborative Community aims to harmonize approaches to speed delivery to patients through collaboration in the pre-competitive space. The PI-CC is open to all stakeholders, public or private, including but not limited to academia, industry, healthcare providers, patients, and advocacy groups. Meetings of this kind are an example of lawful activity under federal antitrust law because the focus of the meeting is on government action or policy, including the industry's responses or positions taken with respect thereto. However, antitrust monitoring is needed for companies' own protection, since they are direct competitors meeting together. These meetings need to stay within protected subject matters and need to be monitored so that they do not stray off into inappropriate areas, such as pricing and price terms, sales and service territories for particular products, customers and customer territories, each company's individual decisions regarding selection of suppliers or customers, marketing plans and especially future marketing plans or new product offerings, other proprietary or competitively sensitive information. Today's meeting will follow the written agenda, and there will be no discussion of pricing or other prohibited topics. If the discussion veers into those topics, we will terminate the discussion. If you have any questions or concerns about the propriety of the discussion, please raise it immediately, and we will take a break to determine how best to proceed. The Medical Device Innovation Consortium acts as the formal convener, and we will follow their conflict of interest policy. For additional information, we defer to our Code of Conduct and our website, www.pathologyinnovationcc.org. We look forward to moving the field forward.
All right, so let's get this started. Welcome to the SEER Microscope meeting number 2. Great having you all. I think there's a couple of more people joining later, but I thought we can get started. Nisha, do you want to show the progress and maybe some of our findings, and then maybe we can discuss?
Yes. So I have the slides with the actual tables and figures, and then I have our outline of our general sort of methods and study design. So I could probably start with the actual methods first, so kind of contextualize how we actually arrived at the data. And then I'll probably also ask Emma and Alex to pitch in about data pull methods, because they probably know a lot more than I do about that. But just to generally start off, to give sort of a brief refresher, our mission is to essentially find a baseline of how cancer is diagnosed using existing publicly available data, which is the SEER database. And that includes data on 35% of the US cancer population. And we, to my knowledge, are using data from 2010 to 2018. And the main goal is us looking for the ground truth of how much light microscopy continues to be used as a primary diagnostic method, as so many other modalities and technologies for diagnostics have come up. So we feel that providing that baseline for the field would allow a true assessment of the impact of the more recent technologies. So we are doing that by using a combination of both ICDO and NACER coding. So ICDO specifies tumor site and behavior, and then NACER coding, specifically item 490, are 9 codes defining diagnostic method. And they're essentially the same coding systems between heme and non-heme, except for code 3, which talks about immunophenotyping and genetic studies. And that would only apply to non-heme, and solid tumors don't have that third code. It just goes 1, 2, and 4. The NACER coding is super critical to how we actually pull our data, because that is what is differentiating the light microscopy diagnoses from the non-microscopically confirmed diagnoses. And that is how we are arriving at our primary endpoint, which is that final big percentage of how many cancer cases are truly diagnosed with a light microscope. And then our secondary endpoints so far are stratifying that by code, site, and state. and also looking into how those trends change over time. So that is kind of just the big brief overview of what we're working on so far, and then the actual data pull, which I can start sharing our slide presentation with those.
So maybe before we get into the data, let's briefly go over the sort of, because this is going to be the last time we're going to talk about the method. And I believe if Ahmed is not on the call, we want to make sure that that is sort of just from a section perspective ready to be written up. So, Ulla, do you have the outline, or could you share that?
I have it, I can share it.
Okay. So maybe we can just sort of quickly talk about the big paragraphs. So the first would be sort of outlining what the study design is, and then what the data is that we use, and the variables. So maybe that could be data and variables. And then analytical plan is, of course, what are our primary facts that we want to get from this. Of course, the first one is what is the fraction of microscopic diagnosis of cancer? And then there's a statistical component, right? So let's say, at least in the first draft, those would be the 4 paragraphs. Ah, there's Ahmad. Cool. Thank you for joining. So if we, Kate, Ahmed, because this came basically from us, so it would be great to see whether you agree with those paragraphs or whether there's like some really high level stuff that we're missing here. And then maybe just to briefly go through this sort of these individual bullets. Should we go through one by one? Would that be okay?
Hey, helpful just so I can read as well as listen.
Okay. So I think the first paragraph would be mostly that this is, in a way, a retrospective analysis of existing publicly available data that is highly curated and with the aim to identify the baseline of how we diagnose cancer today. So that is the, I think I would consider that the study design. So it's a retrospective analysis of existing data. And then the second part is, of course, like what is the data that we use? So that would be the SEER database, just like Nisha outlined. We can add 1 or 2 lines on, what that is. Probably this section to outline what the SEER database is probably more introduction, I guess, for the paper. But and then real-world data on how cancer is diagnosed in the US today. So this is not, the SEER database is the actual real-world data, right? It's not trial or artificial or study sets, etc. This is like how it's done. And then pre-competitive, I think that's just because, number one, we're in PyCC, but we're trying to get trends outlined, not to portray, let's say, a certain cell-free technology. So this would truly be a scientific project to provide a ground truth, let's say status 2019, because that's the newest part in the SEER database, and form a baseline. I think baseline is a good point there. So while there are other modalities for diagnosis, like microscopy represents the most used approach, or that is the question, right? I think we all know that that's the case, but that's the key question. And then, so this was effectively the that should capture the basic study design. So are there comments on that? So this is not taking into account like any of the data or analytical components.
Just that looks fine. I threw a few comments in the chat just asking clarification on exactly the range of the retrospective study, but I can clarify later.
No, but
think,
that's great. So let's go through. So was there a particular reasoning for the 2015 start time? Um, we did go back further, right?
I think 2010, right?
Yeah, so I think we actually did pull till 2010. I think we just initially subsetted it for exploration purposes, just so we could explore the data very briefly. I'm sorry, this was copy pasted from something that was written earlier. And then I think then we like expanded it to the full data set starting from 2010. So that's a mistake on my part. But Kate, just so I understand, are you asking why we chose 2010 as a starting point, or are you just clarifying my small error?
2010 does make sense as a starting point, but just knowing how SEER set up, 2015 was, I was a little confused.
Oh, makes perfect sense. Sorry about the confusion. That's on me.
Other comments on this? Ahmed, you okay with this as well? Okay.
So
Let's.
I've just written in the chat that we are mentioning SEER, but we are analyzing in ACR data. So first, apologizing because I'm on the train from Ulm to Berlin, so
Got it.
I will not be able that clear.
Okay.
And we have analyzed in ACR, but we mentioned here SEER. The NACR has adopted also the SEER variables, but we have to, I think, mention that we are. Which one are we analyzing? We can analyze, of course, this year, and there are also population.
Yes. So let's clarify this. So what would you suggest? Because the NACER code is in SEER, but I know NACER also has the SEER data. So what would you suggest? Because we took SEER data and analyzed the variables that are included, which is NACER, or would you suggest the opposite?
We can mention that we are analyzing in ACR. Or there is also the database provided by CDC, which is it is clear how much SEER data within it and how much how many people from the how many from this year, how many from the NTCR database. So the two databases that the NACR are collecting the data from.
Yeah. So I think the main purpose for not going. Sorry, I mute you again. There's a lot of noise. So the main reason why we went for the SEER data is because it can be linearly traced, not necessarily used. I mean, you can argue for either database, but from the State Cancer Registry, there's a direct link to the SEER database, not through anything indirectly. And as we pointed out in the next paragraph, which we haven't discussed, is like which data and variables are we pulling? And I really wanted to spend some time here. So maybe Ahmed, if you have other comments, maybe you can say why NACER would be better, but we started with the SEER data and we used NACER variables. That was sort of the conceptual point. As long as we keep that consistent, we can discuss that there would be other options. Maybe we can keep that point for the discussion.
SEER, just to mention, SEER is limited to 30% of the population, not all United States data. So the maximum coverage of SEER is 30, starting from 2000 to 2010. And before that, it was 10%. So, but the NACR claimed that they have like 99% of the population starting from 2000.
So we didn't quite get the rest, but so NACER has a higher populational representation is what I heard. So maybe we can discuss whether we want to do both and then compare the findings to also illustrate whether SEER is representative. But let's talk about the data and variables, because I think we want to look at some of the data today. So ICD-0 codes, of course, separated into two pools, meaning solid tumors and hematologic tumors. So this will likely require a supplemental table as a dictionary. Meaning, if you look up a random tumor as one of the authors and you want to know how did they classify this and that tumor, meaning, was that put in the solid or in the heme tumor group, we will need to have that as a lookup. Or is this done in SEER already? Probably not, right? Okay, so this part, Ulla, maybe you can highlight the supplemental table as dictionary, because we would need a consensus here. Ideally, several pathologists need to review this to make sure that the ICD are formally assigned. So I presume NACER has some guidelines, because NACER separates the item 490 into solid and heme. So there must be a way to separate out what is solid and what is heme, right? So that will require alignment, so that the ICD-0 diagnoses match the NACER standard for assignment of solid versus heme tumors, because that's how we want to classify it. And then source tumor site features, I think we have to add all features here that we want to extract. So let's say age, sex, whatever ancestral information, possibly location. I think that was one of the big things that some people suggested, whether there are locational changes or trends, and then whatever other socioeconomic factors we want to take into consideration, if available. But this is something we just have to define in this section. This is not necessarily the final list, but just that we have sort of this place to put in other factors. And then for the NACER 490 code, we did sort of an arbitrary line between the codes representing microscopic and non-microscopic subsets. I don't know, do you have this at hand or should I pull it up?
I have them on like a slide that I can pull up.
Perfect, yeah, if you can just share that, because that's another thing where we would need to reach consensus that that's the right approach.
Yeah.
I meant the one that we already put together for the manuscript, Nisha.
Oh,
because this is how it's implemented in NACER, right?
Mm-hmm. I don't think I have that one on hand. If it's not in SEER figures, I'm pretty sure.
Let me just quickly. share my screen here. So this is, in the current version, the, oops. Somehow this jumped over. So these are the codes for the hematopoietic and lymphoid neoplasms. I think this is what was provided. And this is the solid tumors, meaning all ICD-0 codes that don't fall into this range. And then we would take or draw the line here into the 3 buckets: microscopic, not microscopic, and unknown. I don't know, any objections to that? Okay, perfect. So then we can go back to Ulla to the outline. So the next item here is then, of course, the analytical plan. So primary endpoint is the fraction of cases with a microscopic diagnosis. So that would be the top part of the table that we just discussed. And then I think the next step here would be to define secondary endpoints, very, let's call it concrete, so that we can hopefully, settle this. So by code would be by ICD code, right? Then by site could be, by anatomic site, or and then any other population-based metric. So we could say by age, by sex, by, any of the features. But I think the key endpoint is the fraction of microscopic diagnoses. And, so we could, for example, define a contingency analysis where we have the microscopic versus the not microscopic diagnoses and compare whether patients who have not been diagnosed with microscopy are older or younger, are more or less female or male, have a certain tumor more or less, right? So that contingency analysis would be based on the mode of diagnostic confirmation method. So in other words, is the subset of cancers diagnosed not using the microscope following a typical paradigm? I mean, it would be very interesting to see, for example, if there's a certain socioeconomic metric in there, or whether rural versus, city-based or county-level information. I don't know. That would go very far. We probably don't need to include this, but just to, if that data is available and easy to get, that would be an interesting secondary endpoint. But I think for the main endpoint is just what's the fraction. We should actually, Ulla, as a top secondary endpoint would be the fraction by solid and the fraction by heme, right? So, I mean, there's literally a single percentage endpoint for this, which is the overarching percentage, but we want a fraction for heme and solid, which may be different.
Joe, I'm sure you're aware.
Yep.
I'm sure you're aware of this, but I know there's a bunch of, in public health, they use a bunch of different endpoints or different metrics to get at socioeconomic status, basically. Do you guys know by chance if SEER has some equivalent of where, as a collective of variables, we can estimate what someone's metric is? I remember reading papers where they use if you have a refrigerator or if you have access to a car and stuff like that as proxies for gauging socioeconomic status. I'm not sure if we want to put in this much effort to get at this variable, but I'm just kind of spitballing here.
So I can put a quick note in the chat, which is a link to some of this as it was discussed, in this case through the cancer tract level. So this is a specialized database, to my knowledge, a subset of SEER, so that would make it even smaller. And I'm not too familiar with, for example, the term of rurality, how to define that. And, so there may be some factors there, but I would probably defer to Ahmad. That's right up his research expertise and domain expertise.
I can also, if this is something we want to pursue, many of my cohort mates in my NCI fellowship use SEER data to elucidate socioeconomic status of various concerns. So I can ask them how they do that.
Yeah, I think from what I'm seeing on SEER right now is that they use median house value and household income and rent, and then percent below 150% FPL. So I think there are a good amount of metrics related to SES on there.
And that's it. There's also a lot of discussion about you have to weight that against region.
I mean, it is that's why we would consider the secondary endpoint, so it's probably sufficient to mention it cursory, just to say that we looked into this. It will not be, the make it or break it data part. That's, that's not the focus, but since we're pulling the data, it would be interesting to provide at least a... Great comments, Ahmad, thank you. So he said that they're not continuous in the whole lifetime of SEER, and those variables are even more limited in NASER. So I think these are points. Maybe, Ulla, if you can add that the additional, let's call it like population metrics, are heterogeneous across the time scales and across database sources. So it's I like that point as well, Kate. To say like 8 years is a short time frame, of course, yes. So I think these are all points already for the discussion, right? To really say like what else can be derived from this. But so in terms of the analytical plan and then the statistics, I wanted to briefly outline that, since, we're going to look at the data in a minute, but so Alex and Emma have done a big data pull from SEER, and Ahmad has put, also a lot of data and already put it in a Tableau interface, which we can review in a minute. So the main aim for reviewing this and unifying this so specifically is that if other contributors or other people would try to redo this, that our approach is really sort of checked for reproducibility. So meaning that we do effectively the same and see whether we end up with the identical percentage. So that sounds a little bit weird, but I think we should really define that we do this completely independent. We can, of course, and we will look at the data now, but that, one group runs a Google search, the other group runs a Google search, and we really compare the results effectively, not line by line, but like bucket by bucket, and say, look, did we find the same number of tumors in solid? Did we find the same fraction of microscopic? So the key for the key primary endpoint, I think we should be really stringent. And then for that part, we would say that, and I think we should do this before we actually compare the exact data pool. But we could say that we define that an acceptance rate for reproducibility for two independent polls is 95% or higher. So if we say, for example, that as a pre-defined acceptance criterion, we would accept the reproducibility in terms of a concordance in 95%, that would be one approach, but it would be great to hear what other people are thinking. Hey, Jared, thank you for joining.
Hello.
Especially reproducibility is gold star, especially if only given the same methods. Write up as what would be in the manuscript. Happy to have. Awesome. Yeah, thank you. So, in lack of another suggestion, should we just say that 95% concordance is acceptable, or should we say something else? So we just, Jared, since you just joined, we're discussing if two independent groups do the exact same data pool, two endpoints are reached. Let's say one group finds 93 and the other one finds 93.2%, and we check over the various hundreds of lines of evidence the concordance or the discordance, what would be our acceptance rate. And I think we should define this before we find discrepancies.
makes sense, but I don't really have any input on what what rate would be best.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Other topics, themes, or big things missing in this like methods section? As SEER already included in NASER, its analysis will show variability per year. Yes, but Ahmed, I think the question is, if you pull SEER data and we pull SEER data, do we reach the same?
I would like to show you a slide. I have
Please, I just made you co-host.
Okay, thank you. This slide represents the uveal melanoma incidence in the United States.
We can't see your screen yet.
Yeah, just a second.
Got it.
Okay, so screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so here is a comparison between SEER 9 and in turquoise, this blue line, and this is the incidence of uveal melanoma over years, starting from 1975, using SEER data. Okay, and you can see that it is moving up and down, while the NACR started here in 1995, and you can see how stable is the incidence in comparison to the SEER 9. So the SEER 9 goes very down and then go up and exceeds the incidence in NEACR. So you find variability while they are stemming from the whole population, which was, I mean, of the United States, but of smaller number of patients. And you can see that the incidence is more stable in the NACR data. The NPCR data, which is
do you have the numbers? Do you have the numbers for this? Meaning, is NASER 100? No, but I mean, is NASER 100,000 and SEER thousands?
The numbers here.
I know what the display is. That's the rate per 100,000. But what I meant is, the stability may be a function of having larger numbers. But I think this is interesting. But this is comparing the robustness of the data between databases, right? But what we were just discussing is whether there's reproducibility in two independent groups analyzing the same data.
Yeah, I mean, using the SEER in comparison to using the NACR will show this variability also. So the variability will be bigger in the SEER data if we used it and didn't use the NACR. And this is resulting from the number of people, within this year, the number of patients.
Mm-hmm. So the key element would be to focus on SEER, and let's say one is SEER Alex and Emma, and then one SEER Ahmed, and plot sort of a similar graph. But for the number and fraction of cases for microscopic, we could take all 9 graphs, right, and plot those side by side and really focus on what fractions should be discrepant. So in other words, the reproducibility we would define as that the statistical analysis of the data should be achieved again from both groups. I think that's the part here that we want to. So just in case someone goes back in time and pulls the data again. All right. Other points about the methods section? All right. Then, Nisha, maybe you can show some of the data.
I was gonna ask if it would be easier for us to determine secondary endpoints once we know the exact span of metrics that we have. So like, for example, I was also interested in seeing if there were trends between like Medicare accepting and non-Medicare accepting hospitals, but we can only know that once we have all of the metrics available to us, right? So is there going to be some sort of resource that lists every possible metric recognized by SEER? Because I think it would make more sense to determine secondary endpoints after we have that, right?
Yes. So I think there are hundreds probably, right? Because there's a lot of features there. The question is how many of those are relevant as an endpoint and how many do we want to pull? Meaning, what, depending on what questions we want to ask and or answer, of course. Okay.
Okay. Alex, do you wanna?
Sorry.
I can do the slides. I haven't been completely briefed on what the actual figures mean.
I believe Emma made these figures. I can guess my way through them, but I don't think that would be useful.
Hi, I can speak a little bit to these figures. So what you're looking at here is a breakdown of the SEER database, only looking at solid ICD codes, broken down by the percent or the type of diagnosis it was. So with the top level being positive histology, all the way down to the bottom level being an unknown diagnosis type. So what you can kind of see is that Nisha, is there any way you can zoom in at all? It's just an overwhelming amount of data.
Let me see. Oh.
Sorry, I know these were just exploratory figures. So what you're looking at here are just all these different types of cancers. And then go towards the right end. Yes, and down a little bit. Awesome. So what you're seeing here are your different levels. The topmost level, positive histology, is where you're finding most of your cancers are being diagnosed through positive histology, to all the way to 100%, for most of these types of cancers. The interesting one, in my opinion, is column 3, positive histology and immunophenotyping and or positive genetic studies, still diagnosed with microscopy, and you're seeing more variability in where in the percents that we're getting the numbers from. We reproduce this for both solid and heme, and then if you could go down to my later slide. Here's, yep. I'm actually thinking, could you go down to the one that we looked at with in the meeting the other day with Joe? Perfect, yes. And this kind of shows, if you take a step back from the heat map and you just want to look at what percent of solid and heme are diagnosed by microscopy versus by any other method. The lighter colors indicate positive histology, the darker colors indicate other methods. That on average, around 93%, and I can show you how I got that figure in particular, came to be diagnosed through some form of microscopic confirmation.
So let's just briefly go through the color grades here. So it says X1, 2, 3, 4. So
Yep.
what is, so X1, that is yeah.
So X1 is positive histology, which is, and these are all columns that came straight from the SEER database. 2 would be positive, what is that? Exfoliative cytology, no positive histology. 3 is histology or immunophenotyping, and 4 is microscopic confirmation without specifying what kind of method.
So, but this is, so the bar graph currently shows, so each blue bar graph shows 4 subsets, correct?
Yes.
And so the remainder, meaning the item NASA 495, 6, 7, 8, and 9, would be sitting on top of the blue bar, correct?
Yes.
So that part we probably need to include to show that that is basically ending up being 100% per year.
Yep.
Per solid tumor, and then also the same for heme. So it's clear here that there's a trend that this fraction of non-microscopic diagnosis is lower in heme malignancies than in solid malignancies. But since we're only looking at the subset of microscopically confirmed, I think we have to have on both the other subset as well. So then there's obviously a trend of this increased dark red-brown. So that would be X3, and that would be histology plus immunophenotyping, right? And or genetic studies. Is that correct?
So like flow cytometry would be the bulk of that, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because that is obviously shows a trend that happened over the last 10 years, right? Which I don't know if that has been published or shown in this way, but obviously the advent of flow cytometry, immunophenotyping, and or genetic studies that are all subsumed in here is clearly evident. But there's obviously also a lack of that on the solid tumor side, so we don't know whether that would look the same. So I think one clear take-home message from this is that aside from cell-free DNA testing on the non-microscopic side, that the microscopic side on the solid tumors should probably account for immunophenotyping. But
so for the sake of the actual legend for this figure, does it make sense to even have that X3 for solid tumors if that code doesn't exist in NASER coding for non-heme?
Well, it seems that some practices or some registries use the code, correct?
Oh, okay. I didn't know because I
don't know either, but I'm asking. So Emma, was there a code 3x3 in?
But I think so far, yeah, we can trust the data.
Yeah, so what we ended up seeing was that in the actual data, even though that there should not be a code X3 for heme, there still was a significant amount of cases diagnosed as X3 or coded as X3.
Perfect. That's a good point for the discussion.
That is very interesting. Regarding the bar chart, I am having a little bit of trouble just reading the numbers. So for instance, in 2010, the solid tumor exactly, do you know what the percentage of 2010 solid tumors were diagnosed by microscope technology?
I'm not sure of the number breakdown by year, but I can absolutely get that.
And that's it. It's just trying to actually see, because Joe mentioned a good point of seeing the entire 100% is helpful, but knowing the percentage instead of just trying to read across the line. Minor note.
So we don't have these numbers. I think we pulled that, right? Can you go to like slide 8? Or is that just the same tables?
It's the same.
Okay. So of course we need the totals to calculate the percentage, right? Otherwise we wouldn't know what the percentage is.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so was this the data so far?
Yeah.
So let me just take a look, because, or do you have the link to Ahmad's tableau, or should I show this?
I don't have it pulled up already, so you can screen share if you already have it up.
So here is a very impressive sort of overview here. I don't know, Ahmad, do you want to, or did he drop off? He mentioned that he has like a poor internet connection. Are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm there. I don't know if you can hear me well.
Yes. So I think this is sort of the percent microscopic diagnosis, and I think this was parsed from Canada and United States, and this was sort of the point here. I wasn't quite sure.
So for every tumor, you can choose the tumor you want on the right side, yes? Mm-hmm. So this will show the percent of the microscopic confirmed tumors.
Mm-hmm.
And this the left side will show the percentage for the whole country. I mean, for the whole Canada compared to the whole USA.
Mm-hmm.
And on the right side, it will show a comparison between the states.
Mm-hmm.
So how much is this tumor microscopically confirmed within this state in comparison to the other states?
It's fantastic.
This compares USA states and Canada states.
Mm-hmm. So,
and that goes, the range is 97% to 89%.
Yep.
Yeah, it depends on what you choose at which tumor you choose. So,
okay.
So you can see here leukemia.
It may be an interesting graph to portray the range across the various tumors, right? And these were sort of the sub-organ systems so that it becomes manageable. Of course, you know, we can parse this out, but for example, when I played around with it, I thought that this was really interesting. And, you know, for example, you know, 77%, you know, in Manitoba, I don't know what's so special about it, but we could also, you know, take New Brunswick, or, you know, I think the other part that I thought was very interesting is urinary system, which of course is a huge organ system with various elements here, but, you know, there's definitely some regional trends. But, you know, here, for example, there's like definitely like a 2% switch in some of the S states, or even more, you know, if you compare like this. And that's across years, correct? The by state.
Yeah, this for the whole period from 1995 to 2018.
But, you know, for example, breast cancer, you know, one of the key, you know, cancers, it's between 96 and 99%. And then, you know, the other one is, of course, skin here. So that's, you know, basically in some
Skin
cancers.
is homogeneous.
Yep.
The skin was usually taken and biopsy, excisional biopsy, and remained though over years. And even the states like Texas that are conservative with it are 79%. This is conservative behavior.
Yes, so I think this here, obviously, if we would summarize this, so one quick question I had is this percent microscopic. You took the same cutoff here, like we did, sort of for the 1, 2, 3, 4 as microscopic.
Yeah, right. So it is
Awesome.
the bigger category, microscopically confirmed.
Perfect. Yep. Yeah, so I think this is, you know, obviously a fantastic visualization that I think we can link from the paper to, so that's fantastic. I think for deciding how to portray the data and how to discuss that, I think I like this idea sort of to go by these organ systems rather than by individual ICD codes, because that's a little bit easier. And then I think we should discuss, for example, I mean, miscellaneous is obviously variable, right? It's a little more variable than the others, and that goes all the way down to 58%. To just say we could branch out one of these tumors into like a little bit of a closer realm. So let me just paste this link in the chat just so you have it here.
And I think we can put this in as one of the outcomes of the paper itself. I think it will enrich the paper by having a link within the paper. Maybe when we reach the end of the submission, we can have a full website for the.
That would be great.
Because I think we will make multiple graphs and things that that we cannot pack in the paper itself. So I think it will be nice to have like a website either under an institutional website or just a separate one.
I think we can probably help whip something up. The thing that I like on this is that, you know, of course everyone will pick their own, you know, favorite organ, and then wants to probably explore a little bit deeper, right? Because, you know, bone and joints, sarcomas, that's like a big subgroup, and, you know, someone who's just studying liposarcoma may want to know, has this ever been diagnosed without a microscope, right? Because I think the list that Emma, or the heat map that Emma showed that like a gigantic subset of ICD codes are just diagnosed using the microscope. But no, I think that's a great suggestion. Let me just stop screen sharing here. So in terms of the data pool, to really compare numbers, because I think that's key to derive at the final bottom line. So maybe we can coordinate that we use the exact same numbers and use the same denominators to just basically, Nisha, can you just share the tables again? I mean, I know that those only show X 1, 2, 3, 4, but maybe we can supplement that through X 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then add the totals, and then maybe have that as the first ground truth data set for the years 2010 to 2018. And then compare those specifically, because those should be identical, right? It's the same query, just that methodologically we have done the exact same thing. And you know, if other folks have also experience with the SEER database, maybe we could even do that across 3 groups. I don't know if Jared or Kate, if you know someone who have done this, but I think two independent queries is totally sufficient to just make sure that we've done the right thing. All right, so I think the next item would be to perform this sort of reproducibility assessment. I think the Tableau is amazing. I think that will add a lot of value to people. Figure-wise, I think we can discuss how to portray this maybe next time when we go over the discussion. So I think the last item to figure out is when we're going to do the next meeting. So should we say like maybe 3 weeks from now? So like the 15th maybe, would that work?
Sounds good.
So any specific time, maybe not too late, so that Ahmed can have a Friday night without us annoying him. How about 9 a.m.? Did that work?
That works with me.
Which day?
As long as it's not 11, that's HTT leadership time.
Yes, I have that on my calendar. So the 15th of October. All right. I hear no objections.
This is amazing progress, y'all. Just in the time since last heard y'all speak. And also the familiarity with the terminology increased like lightning from one to the other.
Well, I think the key element now will be we probably announce this in the next steering committee meeting, because if we have the final numbers and percentages, we need to get a vast amount of stakeholders to provide input in what this data means. Right? So first, what does that mean for digital pathology? What does that mean for genotyping? What does that mean for imaging-based, parsing of data? I think, Ahmad, you mentioned the retinoblastoma, right? That's for the vast majority diagnosed without, microscopy, etc. Okay. Other comments, suggestions, wishes?
Can you share the document in a Google document or so, or Google document?
I think we can put that on the website and share it with, of course, everyone here as well. Just sort of the methodological outline. Yes, of course. And the recording plus slide decks, etc. We can put on the website as well. So we're fully transparent on what we're doing. All right, perfect. Thank you everyone for taking the time Friday afternoon and middle of the night. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.